This is a HP ProLiant DL380G7. The 7th generation of this model. It is a 2U server. It takes up 2 U's, and this is the most common configuration. It comes with 8 small form factor drives, although there is an optional additional 8 for 16, but that's much less common. There is also a 6 drive large form factor for the full size hard drives. That's probably even more rare. I really have not seen many of these. Most come like this. The 8 drives here, blank with a CD drive. That's probably never ever been used. If we look over here, we will see a small diagnostic panel. This has LEDs for both power supplies, over temperature, the power capacity, all of the DIMMs. If there is a problem with any of the memory modules, a light will correspond, and for processors. There is also one for the NICs, the integrated networks. This particular model has 4, we will look at that in a minute. Over here we see the little drives. These are the small 2.5-inch desktop drives. They are considerably smaller than what some people might be used to. These are SAS. They are the 10K versions. The lighting is kind of bad here because I'm not in a very good position. They're not bad drives. These are in a RAID 5 because there wasn't really much else I could do. And these are quite ferociously expensive to replace though, so watch out if you do buy this. You can fit in normal laptop drives, but these drives are better, but they cost a lot, even secondhand. And I wouldn't necessarily buy secondhand drives. These are just blanks, unfortunately. So if you want to put more hard drives in, you will need to buy them with the caddies, or buy the caddies separately. If you don't know what the caddies are, they're these little plastic things that the hard drive rests in. They are quite expensive on their own too, so watch out for that if you do decide to buy one of these. There isn't really much else on the front. There are these little handles that lock it in and allow you to pull it out of the rack. So I'm going to spin it around and we can have an overview of the back of the server now. This is the rear of the server. We can see here we have 2 hot swappable redundant power supplies. These are 460 watts each. These are set up to be redundant, but if you wanted, I suppose you could probably just use one, or they can be married together if you need more than one power supply. But you should really have these in redundancies because at this point these are from around do these have a date on them? I'd say these are probably from around 2010, so you'd really want backups in case one of these fails. And they're not too expensive if they do fail, so they're these nice giant connectors that connect to a backplane inside. We'll see that later. Underneath we have 2 USB ports. These are the only 2 on the back. There's also 2 on the front. There is a VGA port here for a monitor, if you need one. There's also one on the front, which is very handy for if you want to diagnose the server or do any configuration on it in the BIOS. There are 2 Ethernet ports here, or J45s, and over here, that is the management port. That is for the integrated lights out adapter. That's a very handy feature if you want to manage the server remotely. There is a serial port and PS2 keyboard and mouse ports. Those are very handy if you need driverless control, if you're using some weird setup. There's where the hard drive, there's where the PSUs go. PCI, there's a graphics card there for processing. There, we'll show you inside. Another 2 here, and another 2 here. And for removing the cage for the risers, there are these screws here that need to be undone. These are mostly already undone. There is a small wrench here that comes with all HP servers, and most, I believe the IBMs also come with them. This is very handy for taking the server down, as it has both Torx heads that are used on the server. This server is almost exclusively put together using Torx screws, so a good set of Torx screwdrivers is also very good because this is kind of small, handy. It's handy but small, so I wouldn't advise doing much work with this. There is a small latch up here that you can lock so that it can't be opened easily, but this Allen key is on the back, so it's not a lock, it's just so that people can't open it while it's on or anything. It's really simple to operate. You pull up, it engages on a small catch there, and it just pulls the lid back. I have to say, this is a really nice server for if you're opening it single-handed, because it slides the entire lid backwards and forwards. In order to remove it though, I'm just going to pop the camera back down on its little tripod and pull this off. On the back here we can see the little diagram. Most servers have these, some have them on the front. I prefer them on the inside in case they get scratched while you're sliding them into racks. It's not likely to get scratched on the inside. This is an overview of the main board. I much prefer this layout to the other HP server I have. This is a much nicer layout. There's better heat sinking on everything. It's a better layout. This is a much nicer server than that one. Of course, this is the 300 series. These were designed primarily for mass enterprise use, so these will be a much nicer server. A much higher quality inside too. We'll see that in a second. There's detailing the front of it. There's the 6-bay version I already mentioned. Much rarer to find. They're not as common. The second bay here for the 8 drive is also kind of rare, but I've seen less of these than I have fully spec'd 16 bay servers. Over here is information for that's not really applied anymore. You're not likely to buy a CPU for this from HP directly, not anymore. Well, not unless you're working in the actual IT sector and you have a long service life contract. This particular one was discontinued into 2013, so you're not likely to still be using it in a data center, and that is why that's not really important. If this only has one processor, make sure it has 2 heatsinks. Otherwise, updating to a second processor will need a heatsink, as most of these models sold with one and they are kind of expensive. Then you reveal the top cover. This is what you are greeted with. The main processor banks, memory banks, fans, and this is the PCIe cage. This has all of your PCIe connectors. Doing this one-handed is not easy. There are 2 little latches on either side that pull this whole cage up out of the server. It's advised to do them both at the same time, and I like to do them like this so that my fingers can lift it up, but I'm holding the camera. The more common configuration of this had only one of these cards, and it would be in this slot. I moved it over for better airflow for the fan here. You can get a second riser card. They're interchangeable, they're the same on either side. That would let you put 2 graphics cards in here. This is a full-sized 16x slot, but it is only wired for 8x operation. Similarly with these 8x slots, they're only wired for 4x, and I doubt they could support a full graphics card together. Usually they're only rated 25 watts for the RAID controllers, an additional RAID controller. The one on this particular model is over here, but if you were to put an extra 6, if you were to have the 6-bay models, they would be powered off this, and the 8-bay model, 4 bays for each one. But if you want to put in an extra 8 bays, you would have to put in a second card, because this one only supports 8 bays out of the factory. There is the battery backup write cache. The battery is right here. It is a bit of a nuisance because this cable is really annoying. It's heat shrunk, not properly sleeved, so it's a bit of a pain. And these batteries, I don't know how much of a life they have, but I'd reckon that one is probably nearing the end. It could also be a supercapacitor, that's very common. This is a FirePro V5900. It's a nice small little graphics card that's not too powerful or not too power hungry for this particular model, and it fits in nicely there. This is one from a previous video. If you wanted to put a full-size graphics card in, like maybe something like this, I would only advise blower style coolers for servers because it's really important to exhaust the hot air back out here, but this one exhausts at the top, so this one would be a much nicer one, but there's no actual power cord connector per se. There's a 10-pin port down there, but that's for the soft backplane, the second one. And you wouldn't really want to power a graphics card from one of those, as they're not very good. This also physically won't fit. If you were to try to install this, it would foul on the heatsink. If you do want a server with a graphics card, I would advise the IBMs. They typically have much smaller heatsinks for the CPUs, so that let you fit a graphics card on top, but this model has nice powerful CPUs, and I like to keep them cool. These heatsinks in here, I'll show you those now. Oops. Are quite powerful, they're quite beefy too. I very much like them. They're quite large. I don't really want to pull it off, but they're nothing fancy though, unfortunately. I would like to have maybe seen a vapor chamber or heat pipes, but these are quite big still. They're more than enough to keep the CPUs I have nice and cool. The memory banks are here. There are 9 DIMMs for each processor. This officially supports 288 gigabytes, but also on HP website it says it supports 384 with 12 32 gigabyte DIMMs. I think they made a mistake. I don't think the system would support that much RAM, but I don't have it to check, so I can't verify that or disclaim that. I'm just going to pop that back in. I'll have to reapply the thermal paste later. This model has hot swap fans. I think they're around 40 millimeters, maybe 20, I'm not sure. They're counter rotating like the other one, but this one, they're a hot swap. They're bigger and they're noisier. The hot swap system is really quite simple. You can just let them drop in. They usually click in, but I like to push them in to make sure they're in. Over here we have the VRMs. There's 6 phases for each CPU and 3 for each of the memory, which is really good, really nice, beefy. It can support full power 990 CPUs, the 5690s, no problem. I wouldn't have any issues running those in the server apart from the cost. They're not cheap. North Bridge, probably South Bridge. These are the connectors for the 2 riser cards. Over here we have an SD card and a USB port over here. These are primarily for booting the server off of them. I use this SD card for running ESXi 6.5. It is a really nice operating system for these servers. It's a virtualization host. This particular server, I usually pull it out in the mornings or late at night when not that many users, because this caters for both European and Americans, so the morning times is usually the most suitable for swapping out stuff and doing stuff. This is a cute little mechanism for if you have a full-length graphics card or other PCIe device that slots in here. It holds it up at the back, single slot obviously. I'm not a huge fan of this system either. It doesn't come with all the parts out of the factory for the base model, and it's not a nice system. I much prefer IBM's approach to this, which has a plastic bracket that folds around. It's a much nicer system, but this is what you get. That's most of the features of this server. It's a nice server. I like it much more than the other one. It costs not that much more either. If you were to buy a bare bones system, the other server, this one would set you back maybe an extra $80 US. It's really worth it though for what you get. It's a much nicer server. I'd imagine this would last a lot longer too. It has a much nicer layout. Each CPU gets nice cold